I knew going into it how expansive it was going to be, and I knew it was going to. It took me basically 3 years from concept to finish,
Right.
and I knew to do it right because that was the other thing. As a comic, it was super important to me. I'm like, I got to get this right. I can't half-ass this.
Hey, everybody, how we doing? It's time for another episode of Another Nobody with me, your friend, Travis Myers. And today we're going to be talking to an old friend of mine, a very old friend named JT Habersaat. All right, me and JT have known each other for, I don't know, 20, 25 years now. He's a funny man, comedian. We're going to talk about his new upcoming book, his past books, the Altercation Comedy Festival, which he still runs, touring, just a bunch of comedy type stuff. And I hope you love it. That's it. Take a listen. Hey, how you doing, pal?
Hey
Good to
T,
see
how
you.
are you? Good to see
Good,
you,
good,
man.
good. I'm so glad you're able to join us here with
Yeah.
your crazy, crazy touring schedule. I know you guys are, well, you in particular, with all the different people you tour with, are constantly on the road.
Yeah, it feels like that way. But that's the job, right? Like that's I always, I just hit 10 years uh since
Wow,
last desk job, the full-time comic touring and
10
other stuff,
years.
other side hustles. But
Yeah.
when I did that, I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it for real. So that's going to mean a lot of touring. And so yeah, I've been lucky that I get to work with people that I dig quite a bit, and then solo shows here and there too.
Yeah, I
But
can't believe it's been 10 years already.
isn't that crazy? It's been I've
Really, really,
been in
really has
Austin
been. I
almost.
mean, and
It'll be.
that's solely comedy because you were doing comedy for how many years before then?
I didn't really start comedy much till I moved to Austin from New York. So I moved there in 2005. So I'm coming up on 20 years in Austin, which is crazy. That's hard to see. I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, I've known you for like 25 years or something like
It's
that.
coming up to that now.
Something
Yeah.
like that. And so, I started dabbling in it down in Austin in like 2007. That's when I started pursuing it, I guess.
Right.
And I'd done some in college. I had done some sketch stuff in college, and a little bit of stand up, but not anything serious. So I was more into the rock and roll stuff and the music magazine at the time, Altercation Magazine, and
Yep. Yep.
bartending at
I
Snapper McGee's and all that stuff.
I remember it well, my friend. I do.
Yeah,
I do.
record label in there somewhere too. Took up a lot of time.
You know. But
Uh,
you know what? All of that. That's for another episode.
yes,
I'm
yes,
really interested in this book that you got going, and that's
yeah,
what we're going to try to plug for you
mm,
as much as possible.
yeah,
Right.
man.
So
Thanks for
let's
having me
jump
on.
right into this book of yours. Now,
Yeah.
this is book number 3.
Yes, yeah. Book number 3. The first book was like a compilation book. So that was from the Altercation magazine. It was Altercation Archives, so it was kind of like a collection of either unpublished interviews or just interviews with high-profile people, like Joan Jett and Billy Idol and folks like that, more rock
That's
centered. Um,
Yeah, I
the
remember your
second,
commentary on Jello Biafra on that one.
yeah, Jello
Yes.
could be cooler. Jello, I, I, I've come to understand though, as I was talking with Fat Mike from NoFX one time, and he said the thing you need to realize is anyone who's been a real punk rocker like Jello since the '70s is fucking weird.
Yeah.
Like
And
that.
that's coming from a rather weird fellow himself.
Fat Mike is an odd duck as well,
He
and
most
and
certainly is.
yeah, and so they, but that's proven really true. Like, and I think a lot of it is honestly a degree of undocumented or well, maybe they're diagnosed now, but like, there's a bit of people on the spectrum I think who were into punk rock back in the day,
Well,
and
uh, to, we got to talk about your book before we go
yes,
there,
we'll
though.
get there.
The whole thing with the punk rock scene, which to me personally is the more, shall I say, more artistic, more intellectual of the
Yeah,
rock and roll music genres in
yeah,
general, right? But for anybody that's that driven
mhm,
period, and that'll be you and I included.
yep,
There's something different
yes,
about them,
for
whatever it
sure.
is.
For sure. But there's also, I think, with the front man specifically, there's something socially awkward sometimes with people from
Sure.
back then. Even somebody like David Byrne, who's
Hmm.
he's admitted he's like, yeah, I'm very autistic, hard to be in a band with because like, the first time I met Henry Rollins, I went to shake his hand and he looked at my hand before he shook it.
Yeah.
Those guys are just a little off.
Yeah.
And Jello is definitely in that camp. But yeah, so that was all the rock and roll stories. And then I did Killing for a Living, which was like my tour journal books of
Correct.
starting from when I left my last desk job in 2014, and just the process of trying to be a full-time comic for those 2 years and grinding it out. Um, and
A
so
lot of
this new
eye-opening
one,
stories in that one.
yeah, there's a lot of good stories in that. And that book, I was happy with that book. It took a lot of work. I mean, look, you write books. Books are the hardest thing, I think, like in terms of your enthusiasm will carry you with the idea and everything. But once you start it, you have to finish it. Otherwise it's nothing.
Yeah.
And,
It's grinding through it, and for me, and I'm sure every writer agrees with this. The writing is tough. The rewriting kills me.
yeah, everybody,
Going back over it.
I forget what quote, it might've been Bukowski or somebody, but they always said, write a little drunk and edit stone sober. And I found that to be very good advice. Because I'm a night owl, so I do a lot of my writing at night, and
Yeah.
then during the day I'll go through and reflow and edit stuff for clarity and tone and whatever. But that book did pretty well. People who bought it really liked it, and I had shopped it around a little bit, Killing for a Living, and got good response, but no's. Like it was
Yeah.
people saying that we like this, but it's just not for us. And I said, okay, that's cool. And I self released that one via Ingram, which I think you might use as well. Ingram,
Yeah.
their distribution setup, which gets you into Barnes and Noble and stuff. But it was still essentially a self release that I sold at tours and stuff like that. And this new one is called Doing Time, subheading Comedians Talk Stand Up. And I had the idea for this during pandemic, where I was just like, why isn't there a comedy version of Please Kill Me? Which, if again, I don't know how punk rock your audience is, or where they skewer, or if they're more true crime or what, but Please Kill Me was written by Legs McNeil, who was one of the guys alive, along with Mary Harron, who's now a famous director. She directed American Psycho and all these movies, the Betty Page movie, and they started Punk Magazine back in the day.
Yeah.
Which was a CBGB's. It was like arguably the first zine centered around punk rock. Like it predates Maximum Rock and Roll.
A lot of people think that punk rock, and it very well may be, one of the stories I heard, punk rock and punk bands actually got their name from Punk Magazine. It wasn't named necessarily for
Right,
bands,
right.
but what had happened was all the bands that were featured in Punk Magazine
Mm-hmm.
turned into punk bands.
Yeah,
In other words, that's kind of like where the name or the tag came from, was from, you were
yeah,
tagged because you were in the magazine.
yeah. I know this because you're a New Yorker and you've been around so long. But punk back in the day was a derogatory slang. It was like a prison slang.
Oh yes.
It was not something you wanted to be called. But I
No,
think
no.
that you
Being
know,
punked or being punked up was a bad
right,
derogatory thing.
right,
But it still is, except for in the music world.
right. Yeah, yeah. It was just kind of an emasculating term. And so, yeah, I think you're right. There's a degree of chicken and the egg there, of kind of like people will endlessly argue about whether Sex Pistols or the Ramones were first, which was the first punk band. That's back and forth forever. Um, but yeah, it definitely, that magazine definitely informed it one way or the other. But Please Kill Me is an oral history book, and oral history books are essentially interviews chopped up into little chunks from the interviews to tell a narrative,
Right.
which I've always found fascinating. I always like that because you're getting it's a story, and it takes a lot of work to tell the story right. But essentially, the author is kind of conducting the story instead of inserting themselves into it. And I always thought, when I would get aggravated when I'd read Rolling Stone or something, like a cover story on, say, Bruce Springsteen, right?
Yeah.
I'd pick it up because I'm like, oh, I like Bruce Springsteen. Or Lou Reed. Let me read about this. And then the first page or two of the interview is the author going, I first discovered Bruce Springsteen when I was going through a hard time, and I was
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't care about you.
Yeah.
Get to
Well,
the Bruce Springsteen part. Stop
that's
inserting
something
yourself.
that everybody's guilty of. They always make the story about them.
Sure.
Exactly.
And that's natural. And especially if you're an author, I mean, your voice is going to find its way in, right?
Yeah.
But to me, the thing that I like so much about Please Kill Me specifically, because that was the first time I'd been exposed to that type of a book. I was like, oh, I'm hearing Iggy Pop talk, or I'm hearing Dee Dee Ramone talk, or I'm hearing Debbie Harry talk in my head, because I know what those people sound like, and they're telling me the stories of people who were there. And so that to me was way more engaging than somebody writing a book who maybe wasn't there, or who was there on the outskirts, but I don't really care that you were a fan and you were there in the scene at the time. I mean, those people are important, but to me, unless you were like a photographer or a zine runner or somebody that was actively participating, you're just kind of a reporter, and that's not that interesting to me. So the fact that I'm a comic and know a lot of air quote famous comedians,
Mm-hmm.
and fame is a weird thing too, but I to me, it's more important comedians than famous, but comedians that people know by name necessarily,
Yes, yes.
Um, and there's plenty of people in this new book that are not household names by any means, but they're pretty much full-time comedians, or they do it on a level where it's professional to me. That was the key ingredient of who I decided to interview. Um, I just came to this epiphany. I'm like, there's no real oral history style book of stand-up comedy. And man, there needs to be. And I felt, whether arrogant or not, that I was kind of the right guy for the job, because I knew that I could write a book. I'd done them before.
Well, you've got the books, you've got the journalistic experience from your
Right.
time in the newspapers,
Right. Yeah,
and you're a comedian yourself, so you can meet them on their level, so to speak.
right. Yeah. It's
You're not
not
you're
just
not an outsider in their world.
exactly. And I knew that it's funny. The last thing I have to do before this year ends is write the intro to the book. I have to write my author's introduction. That's the last thing I need to do with it. It's
Oh,
done,
so it's
done,
not
done.
done yet.
I have to do that.
Okay.
But I intentionally wanted to wait with that. I finished the book and it was done as far as the content. And then I had wanted to work on getting a good deal in place. And then I said, I'm going to write the intro last, because when you're too close to a book, I wanted to have some distance from it so I could reflect on when it's
Absolutely,
done.
yeah.
Um, but one of the things I'm definitely planning to talk about in there is that the biggest currency amongst comedians, and I'm sure this is true in the rock world too, but because stand-up comics are all solitary, right? They're all, there's a degree of pure hangout, and I have comedian friends for sure. Some of my best friends are comics, but also there's a degree of arm's length no matter how close you are with someone, because the job is you stand up there by yourself.
Yeah.
Like they're all lone wolves, so to speak, as opposed to bands, which is collaboratory or
Well, that's
sports.
that's the one thing that I've always very much appreciated about comedians.
Yeah.
Okay, is, as you know, and many of my fans probably know, I'm not a big sports fan. All
Right.
right,
Mm-hmm.
but I've always had an affinity towards, well, the only sport that I ever really did, which was boxing.
Mm-hmm. That
And
one-on-one.
the thing about boxing, there's that corny old saying, you play football, you play basketball, but you don't play boxing.
Huh. Oh, I never
You
heard
know,
that. That's good. Yeah.
and with a
Yeah.
comedian, when there's a fight, you got two guys.
Mm-hmm.
Two guys walk into a ring, one guy walks out.
Yeah.
And when you're a comedian, it's you against
Yeah.
a
A
whole
bunch of
room full
guys.
of people. A
That's right.
whole room full of people you got to fight that night. So
Yep.
it is, for lack of a better word, ladies, forgive me,
Mm-hmm.
although you'll probably agree, it's a really manly thing to do to get up on that stage.
It takes balls, and it's what I like about it too
I
is
couldn't do it.
it's funny because I know so many musicians and they're terrified of the concept. Like
Yes.
these lead singers that are just like fearless on stage, but then the concept of getting up and talking is terrifying to them. I liked stand up right away because of it's a self weeding out system in a way, in that everybody's, if you mention you're a comic, I think 90% of the time the response is either I could never conceptually think about getting up in front of people. It's terrifying to me, or I've always wanted to try that. And which is good. I'm not dissuading anyone from that, but like you always have the funny friend or whatever that's like, I should get up there. And I'm like, it's so different joking around with your friends and being funny off the cuff than it is going up and having an act to strangers. It's just different.
Absolutely.
And people will generally, in my experience, go up once and tell all their work buddies and everybody, I'm going to try it. And everyone comes out and they cheer them and they have a great first set. They have a great experience.
Mhm.
And then the second time they go to do it when all their friends aren't coming, and it's actually just the uncaring public or the very caring public, if they paid any money to get in, even if it's $5, they're expecting a show. And you don't have the chops yet. You dumped into the deep end of the pool before you can swim. It's the worst feeling in the world. Like to bomb for 5 minutes feels like an hour. And so a lot of people just don't come back after that, you know.
I don't know where it was. If I read this or maybe I heard it somewhere or on some podcast or something like that. But it's something ridiculous like 99% don't continue with it.
Yeah, because it's
I mean, literally
incredibly
one out
hard.
of 100 continues at all,
Mhm.
and out of that, we never hear of any of them anyway.
Yeah. Well, right now specifically, we're in a huge comedy boom and almost to the point of a flood. Like where it's especially being in Austin right now. There's so many comics. People are saying, "Oh, what comics do you like in Austin?" I'm like, I can't keep up. There's people moving here every day just to pursue comedy, and there's so many shows. I know a lot of the Austin comics that I've known for a long time, and I know names of some people that are popping up now, I guess. But I've always been just keep your head down and do your thing too. And I tour so much that I'm not really interested in doing much stand up when I'm home. When I'm in Austin,
Oh yeah, yeah.
even though it's like being in New York City too. It's like, yeah, it's the hub of things, but you got to really live it. You got to be like, if I were to really pursue comedy in Austin at the level that would make a difference for my career right now, I'd have to go full feet and be down there all the time. I don't want to do that. I get home from the road and I want to relax. Or in this past
How
year,
many?
work on the book.
I mean, I know the last couple of years, ever since COVID finally ended, and actually before then too, but COVID put a big dent, obviously, in everything.
Mm-hmm.
But how many days a year do you spend on the road?
So when I first started in 2014, I say that, full time,
Yeah,
it was crazy. It was untenable. It was something like 150.
right.
Um,
So literally, I mean, spread over the year, it's still 6 months a year
yeah, yeah. And
without
I
a
would go
car.
out, I would go out on my own for 3 to 4 weeks, with like a day or two off maybe. Um, and that was too much. Like I can't comprehend that now.
Yeah.
Now what I do, the primary people I work with now, if I'm not doing solo shows, are Brian Posehn,
Hmm.
who a lot of people know from Mr. Show and Big Bang Theory and stuff, and Eddie Pepitone. Those are my guys.
One of my favorites.
I love Eddie so much.
Eddie cracks me up.
Eddie's the
Absolutely.
best. Eddie and I are. We had a bit of a break this year, a little bit for the fall into the winter because he had
He was
um
sick for a little while. Yeah.
yeah, he had some health stuff going on, but he's on the mend now. He's doing
Good.
better, and so we start up again in February, and I'm excited for that. We start doing shows together
Well, I know
again.
you talk to him all the time, so please give him my best.
I will. Yeah, I'm probably be talking to him today. Honestly, yeah. And Brian is somebody that I've known and worked with for over a decade. And he's always been the kind of the heavy metal comic to my kind of punk rock comic
Right.
thing. And so we always got along real good. And it was kind of an interesting situation because, Eddie needed to take some time off and minimize his touring. And Brian started just calling me up and saying, "Hey, you want to do some shows more?" And so I just kind of shifted in. And in the middle of there, I also did a 2-week tour with Lydia Lunch, which was wild.
Oh, cool. I didn't hear
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to know Lydia during pandemic when I was doing a talk show online. Um, I used to have the Road podcast and that shifted into the Road Live, which was like a talk show thing. Um, and so I knew Lydia a little bit from that and we just kind of hit it off. And, you know, she invited me to be the first comic ever to go out with her. And she's an intimidating force. I didn't know how that would go, but it was good. It was a good challenge because her crowd is, arms folded elder goths,
Right.
that very much are not known for their humor. So it was a good challenge, but it went really well. It's successful.
Now, is she
Uh,
like a comedian, or more of a spoken word type person?
Lydia?
Yeah.
No, Lydia is brutally spoken word. Lydia is in your
Brutally,
face.
brutally spoken word.
Lydia
Okay.
is in your face, raw, sexually explicit feminist
Yes.
middle finger to the world.
Well, that's why when you said it, I didn't know what to make of it. That's why I
Right.
asked. It's
Yeah.
I just don't. She doesn't strike me as a a funny girl. Is
No,
that?
not on stage at all. She always says that
Right.
she's stand-up tragedy, which I like. She,
There you go.
yeah, we
That,
called the tour The Last Laugh,
now
which,
that I can see. I
yeah.
can see.
And so it was a fun challenge for both of us. We liked each other personally and admired each other's work. And I've been a fan of hers since I was a teenager,
Yeah.
so it was a thrill for me. And she's got a very funny sense of humor off stage. It's just not what she does on stage.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, that was a fun challenge. I leaned into my storytelling more than anything
Hmm.
for that because that made sense. Um,
Yes.
but it was weird because where the laughs normally are, I got kind of approving nods of like, I'm listening and enjoying this, but not laughs,
Right. Right.
which as a comic fucked me up a little bit because I'm like, this is where the laugh's supposed to be. Eh. And I was like, maybe this isn't going well. But then afterwards, I always got really good. People come up to the merch table and buy stuff and be like, that was great. I'm like, okay, good. but But anyway, a long tail on this kite, but it's all to say that, I had this kind of epiphany that there hasn't been a stand up, please kill me style book. And not to say that I'm aping that book, because my book is very different than that. Like that book arguably is where also does, do you know
Well, that
Studs
was your
Terkel?
inspiration.
Well, yeah, it was an inspiration. Also, I don't know. Are you familiar with Studs Terkel?
I know the name,
Eh,
but I don't know why I
okay.
know the name. How's
He's a
that?
writer guy that's been around since like the 70s and stuff. And he
Hmm.
did a book called Working in the 80s, which was
Okay.
actually largely based, I think, in New York. I think he went around New York City, but he just interviewed random people on the street about their jobs. So
Oh.
he interviewed like a guy who worked at a mortuary. He interviewed just a day laborer. He interviewed a beautician. And it's not anybody you know, but it was a fascinating read because it's just these people that, you dive into their lives for a chapter and it's just like, wow,
Well, because I always say everybody's got a story.
everybody's got a story. So,
Everybody's got a story.
yeah, I should send you that book. It's pretty fast. I think you'd like it. It's pretty good.
Oh, I'll check it out. I'll check it out.
Um,
Let me ask you. I want to get back to this book. I mean, we are kind of talking about the books. How many comedians did you interview for this book?
I wish I knew. I, dozens and dozens and dozens. So
So a lot.
a lot. I would say upwards of 50 to 60, I think.
Okay,
And each one though, which maybe doesn't sound like a
that's a
lot.
lot. That's a ton.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, because you got to picture. I spent like at least an hour with each of them,
Yeah.
and some longer.
Hmm.
Um, but what I was trying to get to, I guess, where I got derailed a little bit on my own here, rambling about comics is with the intro that I'm going to be ready to write for the book. The one thing that sticks with me is that the biggest currency a comedian can give you is their phone number, which is, and again, the rock world probably has that to some degree, but I feel like it's not quite as cherished in that if a comic that's a larger comic, a headline, somebody from TV or whatever, just somebody respected, gives you their phone number for something, you better not give that number to anybody. You
Yes.
better not pester them. You better use it only when it's important.
Yes.
All the things, because, yeah. And so,
Well, it's a huge sign of respect that
yes,
they allow you to bypass all the gatekeepers.
yes,
You know.
it's a big sign of respect. It's a big sign of peer to peer. It's kind of like a green light,
Yes.
like you're a comic, you get it.
Hmm.
It's a huge sign of trust. It's a huge trust thing. And so, um, I, when I had this kind of realization that there was no real oral history style stand up book, I started going through my phone and I'm like, whose numbers do I have? And I was like, holy shit,
They
there's
started
a
adding
lot.
up.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that I could talk to about this. I could just call them and talk to them, because I know you share my uh, disdain for agent types in terms of
Yes,
they,
I do.
you know, the job they're supposed to do is fine. And if they did that, that'd be fine. But they don't. They just act as weird, arrogant gatekeepers and get in the way.
Yes.
And so that's been my experience. And so I was like, I'm not going through publicists to schedule, oh, you can have 10 minutes on this Wednesday. And I said, I'm not doing, I'm going to message these people that I have their phone number for and say, would you be interested in talking to me for this project I'm doing? And I would say 90% said yes. There were a few people that I didn't know well enough, but had their number where I used a little bit of Eddie or Posehn bridging.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I'm sure, once the word got out that something cool was happening, it became easier to get a hold of people, or other people would call you. Hey, I heard you doing something. I want to be a part of it.
Kind of, yes, but also I'd heard so many nightmare stories of um, Hollywood swiping ideas from comics
Yes.
that I was super locked down on this idea.
Yep.
Like I was terrified, that somebody was going to take the concept because it hadn't really been done before and put out a shitty version of it in 2 weeks with like lame ghost writers. And then the concept would be done and it would make it harder for me to sell it. And also mine would appear to be like a tail chaser instead of the other way around. Because I knew, I mean, it's a 500-page book. It's a, it's 155.
Did you say 500 pages?
It's almost 500 pages. It's
Wow.
155,000 words with no photos. So
Wow.
I knew going into it how expansive it was going to be. And I knew it took me basically 3 years from concept to finish.
Right.
And I knew to do it right, because that was the other thing. As a comic, it was super important to me. I'm like, I got to get this right. I can't half-ass this. And so there were a few people that are so, I don't want to name drop or anything, but like there are certain comics that I know personally. Someone like Jim Jeffries,
Mhm.
which is a brilliant comic from Australia that lives here now. And he's got tons of
I know.
Netflix specials, and he plays venues that are several thousand people.
It's one of my son's favorites, actually.
Jim, it was kind of a classic Hollywood story thing where I was at a party in LA and I ran into him and we just hit it off. We just ended up staying in the corner talking to each other the whole time.
Mhm.
And I've hung with Jim a few times, but to get Jim, every time I would talk to him about being in the book, he was always in like South Africa or like,
Right.
he hosts a big game show in Australia. So he'll go back there for 2 months and, like trying to get someone on the phone in Australia. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
So there, and like David Cross was another one that
Mhm.
my buddy Sean Patton, who's a very funny comic, who I interviewed for this pretty extensively. He tours. He's like what I am to Brian and Eddie. He is to David Cross. And I talked to David Cross in the past and stuff, and I met David Cross on his most recent tour, and we hung out. But he's someone I would have liked to have talked to, but it just didn't pan out, But by and large,
Oh,
yes.
so you could never get with these two guys.
Those two guys are two that like I had in my realm, and
Right.
would have loved to talk to. It just didn't work
Mhm.
out. But by and large, 90% of everybody said yes. It was like,
Cool.
I've known Dana Gould for a long time. And so I talked to Dana Gould, and Dana Gould tours with Bobcat Goldthwait. And I met Bobcat Goldthwait at Chicago at a show. He came and did a guest set with Eddie and I. And so, it's surreal when I'm messaging Bobcat Goldthwait, who I grew up watching in Police Academy and all these 80s movies. They'll be like, yeah, I'll talk to you for this thing. Sure. But I know someone at that level, or Dana, Dana Gould has written some of my favorite Simpsons episodes ever. At that level, unless you have that currency of the phone number and some vouching for, you're not going to get to them.
Let me. Can I ask you? And of course, I don't want to put you on the spot with everybody that you just interviewed.
Yeah.
All right. But who were your, one or two, three of your favorite interviews that you were able to conduct here?
Well, I'm biased, but again, because he's one of my best friends now, and he wrote the forward to the book. But Pepitone, we went to this comedian Todd Glass's house. And Todd's a legend also.
Yeah.
And this was 2022. And we went over to Todd's podcast studio, which is a beautiful thing in the back of his house. And I interviewed both of them there. And Eddie, it was a fun interview because I didn't know a lot about his earlier stuff. Because we worked together so much, we're just in the here and now. And so
yeah, you didn't hear his necessarily his up and coming stories.
Right. I mean, I knew he was a New York guy and we hit it off immediately, but I didn't hear like, because he's been largely sober the whole time I've known and worked with him too. And he's telling me stories about how he drank all these rum and cokes the first time he got up on stage because he was so nervous and he actually threw up on stage. Or how when he was in an improv group back in the day, starting out, they got booked on a cruise ship and it was them and Charo. Charo with the
I love Charo.
Yeah, with the dancing and the giant jugs. And so,
Yes.
Just stuff like that. I'm like,
Whatever happened to her?
she's still around. She's actually still around and alive and do it. I don't know how active she is, but she's still around.
Yeah, she was a hottie, man. I remember.
Yeah.
Her.
And so just funny stuff like that. It was just fun to hear these kind of reveals of your friend, So that was I like that one a lot. Um, I have to say, Patton Oswalt is somebody that I've always admired. He's obviously a huge comedy star, and he's just so down to earth and cool. Like he's just a cool guy.
You know, I'm very
Um,
happy to hear that because I've always thought, and yeah, you do know me personally, and
mhm,
I could give a shit for celebrities overall.
mhm, sure, yeah,
That means nothing to celebrities. I like what you do, man. Other than that,
yeah,
I don't even want to know you because usually I'm disappointed when I get to know you.
yeah,
But
yeah,
Patton Oswalt has always struck me from the nothing I know about him.
mhm,
He just something honest and sincere about him. Something
yeah,
about him I've always liked.
yeah,
So I'm happy to hear you agree with my, I don't know, what would it be? My fantasy of Patton
yeah,
Oswalt? I don't know.
yeah.
You know?
Well, I didn't want to break the book into chapters, which was, I talked to 3 or 4 different publishers before I ended up at the one I'm at, which is an awesome publisher out of London called Jawbone. And, some of them wanted changes. They said, well, how about we break it into chapters, this book?
Hmm.
So it'd be like hecklers or, you know,
Right.
first time stage stories. And then people would jump around. And I'm like, I don't want people to jump around. Like that erases the concept of the book that I worked hard on. You
Right.
know, I don't want people to read it in chunks because it's divided into 3 sections. And the first is called Humble Beginnings, which is just about like, how did you discover comedy as a kid? What made you think you might want to try this stuff like that? The middle and 300 pages of the book is just called The Life. And it's just about doing the job of stand up and what that means. Because a lot of people, I think, the general public, maybe not as much now because there's podcasts and stuff, but a lot of people for a long time thought you were either Jerry Seinfeld or you were nobody. There was
Yes.
nothing in between.
Yes.
And there is, I consider myself a working class comic. Like
Hmm.
that's, you know, I to some people I'm a known entity. To some people have never heard of me at all, and I'm
What
fine
would
with
you
that.
call
But
a journeyman?
yeah, it's but it
You're the guy that grinds it out,
yeah,
you know, day after day, week after week, year after year,
mhm,
you know, keeps it going. But like you say, you're a working class comedian.
yes, yeah, and there's a lot of that. I think
Sure.
that, and there's a lot of those people in this book. That's what I mean. People with solid credits, people that have been on Comedy Central or HBO or whatever, but you don't know them as a name necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so it was important to me to have that represented too. But Patton is someone that in this book during the narrative, there's certain things we talk about comedian mental health, and one of the things is there's a whole section about these comics, these established comics, talking about who they admire amongst their peers,
Hmm.
and there's a whole part about people being talking about how kind Patton is, and he is. It's something you can't fake. You know,
I
he's
like to hear that.
he's very kind to young comics. Like that's the test of something. If someone's kind to someone that doesn't have anything to offer them in terms of career or shine or even like, after the show, we're all hanging out and he went to his car and got a nice bottle of whiskey and shared it. That's something that comics will talk about. So there's almost a degree of like Robin Hood, like Patton, that comic in a way is getting something back and that he's appearing like this grand guy. But most of these stories are like, yeah, we did a show and Patton Oswalt, didn't know us and invited us back to his hotel and said, take whatever you want out of the mini fridge. Like, management's paying for it. I don't care. You guys are starving. Like
Yeah.
stuff like that no one would know of. That to me is true endearing stuff. Um, so there's a lot of, and I mean, there's a whole section also people raving about Pepito, who for a long time was kind of this comedian, unknown kind of folk hero in a sense
Yeah.
of just Eddie's a purist. Eddie couldn't do anything else. I mean, can you imagine Pepitone doing anything besides comedy? I can't. Yeah, I
No.
can't. It's what he was born to do.
Yeah.
And so, um, yeah, so Patton was a really great interview. And we did that one via Zoom like this. So we actually got to, because it was during pandemic, so we couldn't get together in person. But we talked for like 2 hours, you know.
Mhm.
Um, Another guy, which I don't know if you're familiar or not. Do you know the comedian Neil Hamburger?
I do not.
Okay, so Neil Hamburger, I'll send you some video of Neil Hamburger. Neil Hamburger is a guy named Greg Turkington, is his real name, but his stage persona is Neil Hamburger. And it's this concept is he's in a bad suit, and he's got a terrible comb over, and he's always coughing and hacking and telling these really off-color jokes. He's got 9 drinks in his hands. And it's a persona, it's a stage persona.
Yeah.
And but very funny in a dark, weird, it's very Andy Kaufman. And I always liked him a lot, but I didn't know the person. I just knew the stage character.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up getting in touch. And again, not to be all name droppy, but I got to be friends with David Yao, who's the lead singer of the Jesus Lizard. And we're drinking buddies whenever I'm in LA. And he was like, "Oh, you need to meet Greg, Neil Hamburger." And I was like, "Oh," because he was in a movie with him. I said, "I'd love to. I'm doing this book. I'd love to talk to him." And so he gave me Neil Hamburger, Greg's contact. And I messaged him and I was just like, "Hey, I'm doing this book and I'd love to talk to you. And I'm a comic." And David gave me your info. I emailed him. I didn't have his number. And he said, I stopped doing interviews a decade ago because they're all bullshit. I don't want to be, he's like, "I just want to do the job. I don't want to fluffy, I don't want to hype up what I am more than it is. And I'm tired of explaining it." I'm like, "I get that." And he said, "Well, how about we talk on the phone and I'll feel it out and then we can see from there." I'm like, "Sure." So we called and spoke on the phone, and it turned out he used to be the road manager for Mr. Bungle and all these, like, which is,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
the singer from Faith No More's band and like all these music things. And I'm like, "Well, I know that guy." And he's like, "What?" Like we just, because my foot comes from the music world, we knew a ton of people in common from that realm.
Yep.
And I was like, "I was at that show you're telling me about where you had to deal with the shitty manager and whatever." I was at that gig. And so that we really just had a good vibe. And after that, he's like, "All right, I'll do this. Like, this is cool. Like, I'll do this." So his is the first interview he's done in a decade. And to my knowledge, he has no plans to do any more. So that's kind of like an exclusive glimpse into this guy. And he's a fascinating dude. Like he's made films with those, Tim and Eric. I don't know if it's like a TV Adult Swim thing, but there's a whole thing called Tim and
Yes,
Eric.
yes. I know
Okay,
exactly
Tim
what you're talking about.
Heidecker.
Yeah.
So he works with Tim Heidecker quite a lot. They have a YouTube series called On Cinema, and it's just them like doing like a Siskel and Ebert thing, but they're just talking shit to each other in a very dry. It's very dry. You can miss it if you're not. It can come off as a little haughty, in the way that British humor can too, where it's like it's so dry you don't know if they're
Yes.
fucking with you or not. But I think it's very funny. But anyway, he was one that we talked, I think, for almost 3 hours. And so I was really thrilled to have him in there. And Maria Bamford, too, is one that Maria's someone. The first time I met Maria Bamford, do you know Maria? Are you familiar with her stuff?
No, I'm not.
She's someone she's very, and she would agree with this, neurotic in terms of her. She did a special one time where it's just her performing to her parents in their living room. And that was a Netflix special. And it made me so uncomfortable, but it was
Oh, wait a second. I think I know who she is. Yes.
real skinny. She's
Yes.
she's done a lot of stuff like that. She does voices of her mother and stuff.
Yes. 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 I know.
Very,
Now I know who
very
you're
unique.
talking about. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
very.
The name didn't click right away, but I
Yeah,
know exactly. Yeah. She's a funny girl.
yeah. She's just very funny, and also like Patton, the kindest person. Like
Yes.
my friend Avery Moore, who's in the book, is wonderful. Avery got Just for Laughs, which was the big Montreal festival. She got New Faces, which is a huge deal. They only pick like 8 or 10 comics every year to be new faces, and they're unwrapped, so all the agents go to see them and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me she was at the New Faces show backstage, and Maria Bamford snuck backstage, and she gave each of the New Faces people an envelope and said, "I know how hard it is to get up here, and just go have a good time, and don't tell anybody I did this. But I don't want to make it weird, but have a great show, and good luck." And they opened it, and there was like $500 in this envelope to each of these comics that she didn't,
That is sweet.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
That
that
and,
is
and
very
again,
sweet.
it's
You know
amazing.
that that reminds me of my favorite, and I'll let you tell it since
Mm-hmm.
you are my guest. My favorite Joan Jett story.
Oh, the South by Southwest Joan Jett story or the
That's
interview
right.
Joan Jett story?
When we were down there putting on our own show at South by Southwest, our
Yeah,
own little punk rock show, and Joan Jett showed up.
she did. Joan Jett showed up, and also she was playing down the street at Emo's, and we had what, I don't know, 11 people, something like
Something like
that.
that, yeah.
And it was a very sold out Joan Jett show down the street, and talking with her because she remembered the interview that we had done, and she was just so sweet. She put like I think 12 of us on the guest list.
Yeah, gave us a whole
Great.
staff. We took the whole crew.
Yeah.
Everybody went. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791, it's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers.
Yep. Sorry, my battery was dying there. Yeah. Joan Jett is.
We were doing a little dance there.
Yeah, sorry, my battery was dying on my computer. That's all I needed. Um, yeah, Joan Jett was one, and that's a perfect example, actually, of why I refused to go through gatekeeper management types. Is that when I interviewed Joan Jett, it was on the phone, and her person was very, Joan has 12 minutes, not 13,
Yes.
12. And I'm like, that's, fine. Okay, I'm not going to waste her time. And we were talking about the Runaways and all this stuff because I'm a huge Joan Jett fan and I know my stuff. And I wasn't going to waste her time. And we're having this really engaging conversation. And the lady interrupted at 12 minutes and 1 second and said, Joan, that's our time. And Joan said, no, we're good here. Hang up, please. And we talked for an hour. It was just like, and I know why those people are in place. Like I've done enough interviews myself where I'm the one being interviewed where I'm like, some people just don't do their homework or the article comes out and you're like, oh man, that is not what I said. So I understand it.
My friend, every time, and of course, not being a celebrity myself, but every time I have ever been in the news or connected to the news in any way, the story has been wrong.
Yeah.
Every single time. Never once was it accurate. Never.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I definitely understand the hesitance on something, but with this book, it was also important to me that there was this, I was actually glad that the Neil Hamburger guy wanted to talk to me before saying yes. Like that, I prefer that. Because there was trust there, and then,
absolutely. Yeah.
And also since I'm, part of my job as the author of this book is during the interview, not everything's going to go in, it's not going to be a blanket translation. My job is to go through, pick the stuff that I think is compelling or interesting or tells the story. And then it was a massive undertaking. I basically had to transcribe each of these interviews and you're talking, if say there's 60 comics and each one's at least an hour. I mean,
well, you just said there's whatever it is, 500 pages, 55,000 words, and
155
only a fraction of what you had to go through.
Yes. So I had to go through everything. Then I had to segment out the quotes in a way that made sense. Then I had to put the whole thing into a narrative in order and try and tell the story. It was a massive undertaking.
With all that miserable work, though.
Yeah.
All right. And
a lot of it was miserable. A lot of it was tedious.
It was miserable.
Yeah.
People don't get it. It's a lot of work.
Yep.
And it's tough. It's tough putting these things together.
And unpaid work. That's the other thing. There's no guarantee of money with this thing either.
No, not at all.
Not when you're doing it. You're just doing it.
No, you got your fingers crossed the whole time,
Yeah.
But you had to have some funny stories along the way.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
So you had to have some fun putting this together.
Oh, if I didn't want to do it, well, like you, I'm a driven guy. Some of us are just cut from a cloth where we need to create and do things.
Yes.
And for me, writing has always been, all the different hats I've worn in terms of show promoting or magazine running or radio. I started in radio, all that stuff. I think writing has always been my strongest suit. And so I knew I could do the work, and I don't mind work. For better, for worse, I'm also a bit of a workhorse. Um, it was really important to me to get it right. And so, but I mean, in terms of the fun stuff, there was just hearing there's a guy like Chad Daniels who is blowing up right now, but he's also, I mean, Chad is the most streamed comedian alive. He took off on Pandora and stuff like that. And he's so funny. And he writes faster than anyone I know. He puts out a new special like every year, and it's always good. He'll take 2 specials in one night, like 2 1 hour, new 1 hours. I'm like, how do you write that fast? But you know, he's someone I've known. We were both on Stand Up Records together, that label, and I've known him for well over a decade. And he was telling me stories about him starting. I had no idea he was, you know, he was a touring feature for Mitch Hedberg. You know, I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that. He's like, yeah, I went out with Mitch Hedberg for years. I had no idea. You know, so it's fun to discover stuff about your friends that, you know,
So you didn't know.
comics that you, because comics also don't see each other much because everybody's on the road all the time. So unless I'm working with someone like Eddie or Brian, where we're going to the same place and it's a, you know, it's a planned out together tour, I don't see, you know, people like Kyle Kinane, who I adore. And I think it's so funny. I see maybe once a year if we cross paths, you know?
Sure, because you guys are alone all the time.
Yeah. So when you do see those comics, you're not asking about, hey, what was the first time you got on stage? You know, hey, what do your parents think about what you do? You're not doing that. You're catching up and you're drinking some beers, you know, like that's just, and busting each other's balls. So, and usually doing a show. Um, so it was neat to hear all these kind of origin stories. You know, Kinane came out of the punk rock scene in Chicago, and Matt Bronner, who was a very funny comic, those two were like, you know, the Heckle and Jekyll of that scene. They were buddies and they moved to LA together from there and became roommates. They're both very successful comics now. But, you know, I'm hearing from Bronner tell me, yeah, Kyle, when he first showed up, was a rockabilly dude. You know, he's wearing all John Spencer denim and had his hair in the pomade and shit. I'm going, really? Like, that's hilarious to me to picture. He's like, oh, yeah, he had this terrible girlfriend. It was so, you know, stuff like that was a trip. I really enjoyed all that. But I mean, Maria Bamford, you know, the first time I met her, I was at I was doing a show with her and Jackie Cation and Carmen Morales, who are all in the book. You'll love Carmen Morales. She is someone that you would adore. And Eddie and I are at the show watching, and I'm waiting to go up. And Carmen is on stage or someone, and I feel these hands on my shoulder. And this woman leans in next to Eddie and I in the dark, and she goes, and it was Maria Bamford. And she just said, gentlemen, we're all slowly dying. And then she backed up into the office. And Eddie and I fucking laughed so hard. It was just so like, that was my introduction to Maria Bamford. And she was one that she's a big fish. Like there's a lot of publicists and agent types around her. Like she's a major comic. And my friend Brandy Posey, who's like me, a working class comic, and she runs a great label called Burn This Records, which is all comics, comedy label she launched a year ago. I said, hey, do you think Maria would be in this book? And she said, let me ask her. And 10 minutes later, my phone rang and it was Maria Bamford. And so I just rolled tape and got that in. You know, so there's been a lot of cool moments like that where it's just like the enthusiasm of people wanting to do it. And, or like, you know, you're a Kids in the Hall fan, right?
Oh, I love the Kids in the Hall.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite shows when it was out. Which, geez, how long ago was that?
1990,
40 years ago.
91. I mean, you know, when they first came out, I was in college because that's what Kids in the Hall is what made me and my friends like Bob Trendy and Wally White want to do improv and sketch.
I think that's probably is my favorite sketch show. You know,
I think it's the best. I think it's
really,
the best.
really like it. You know,
Even when you get into Monty Python stuff, I think Kids in the Hall is the best and the most.
Yeah.
It's the smartest and it's the most daring, I think, because they did stuff that a lot of mainstream folks would not get or like.
Yep.
And dark.
I really enjoyed it, and what was good, you know, it had good production value,
Mm-hmm.
and it lasted a while too. Sometimes some things come out, they're brilliant, and they give you 6 episodes, and you never see it again. you
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
that
So
was really great.
I was at South by Southwest, and I ran into Scott Thompson, the the most flamboyant of them.
Yes.
And Scott, I always liked kind of the best because he did his very gay Buddy Cole character, where he would sit in the smoking jacket and just like
Right.
talk very bitchy. So the Buddy Cole thing I liked a lot. And so Scott Thompson, and I'm like, suddenly I'm hanging out with Scott Thompson. It's like, this is wild.
One of the heroes from when you were a teenager.
Yeah, it's crazy. And
Yeah.
so we exchanged phone numbers and stuff. And Eddie and I, before again, pandemic messed things up, another variant shut down our tour. We were set to go to Toronto, and he was going to be a secret guest and do stand up with us at Toronto. And like, anyway, I said, I'm doing this book. And he said, yeah, I'll talk to you. So I talked to him for an hour. And I said, I don't want to make it weird, but if any of the other kids in the hall want to I'd love to talk to them. And he said, this was great. Let me message all of them right now. He's like, their schedules are all nuts and we're all crazy. So he said, we're all crazy. So it's hard to pin us down, but let me see who's interested or available. And from that, I got the phone numbers of Bruce McCulloch and Kevin McDonald.
Hmm.
And I interviewed both of them, and could not have been nicer, and talk about some reveals. I mean, every one of the kids in the hall came from like a messed up family life.
Yeah.
And one of the things in the book is Scott Thompson said, he said, what my first acting job that I remember doing was when I was a kid. He said my dad was a drunk and sometimes violent. He could get a violent temper. And so my mom, when we were kids, when we were like 8 or 10 years old, she'd say, "Okay, everybody, I want you to pretend we're going to play groceries." I said, "Grocery? What are you talking about?" I said, "We're going to pretend you're all groceries, and you're getting to the cupboard. What do groceries do? They don't make any noise. So you're going to get in there, and you're going to be paper towels, and you're going to be oatmeal or whatever."
Yeah.
And so one of his earliest acting memories is being paper towel in a cupboard so his dad wouldn't hear him when he came home drunk from work. I mean, that's some crazy shit. That's some like
Yes. Yes.
real formative, like, wow, that informs where you went.
Absolutely.
Um, and
You
Kevin
know, you and I,
McDonald,
you and I both know, you know, so many comedians, and actually goes into the whole rock and roll world too. Just how many, I don't know what I want to say, traumas,
they're damaged souls,
or
like,
exactly
yeah,
things that created these people, and
uh-huh.
gave them the insights that they have,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
to help them do what they do.
Yeah. And that's delved into in the book quite a bit too. Cause I mean, how do you
Yeah.
not, that's important. It informs a lot, but Kevin McDonald was, I would say, arguably the most nervous of the bunch in terms of he has claustrophobia and he's very socially nervous to talk. He's like, I don't like talking on the phone, but I want to do this. I said, how about this, man? How about I'll set it. I said, I'm going to set an egg timer at 20 minutes. And then even if it's going well at 20 minutes, we're going to stop. So, there's a definitive end. He said, okay, that's great. And so I did that. And we had a great conversation. And after 5 minutes, he wasn't nervous at all. And then the egg timer went off. And I said, this is awesome, but we're going to stop now. And if you want to do another one, we can, but you don't have to. And he was like, yeah, let's do another one. But
Cool.
but thank you for stopping. Like he was just, it just was really good. And I ended up not interviewing him again because like I got the juice of what I needed. I felt I didn't want to put him through potentially nerve-wracking thing. But then we kept in touch and he came in and headlined my comedy festival this year.
That's what I was just going to ask. I
Yeah.
couldn't remember which one of these fellas,
Yeah.
by name,
Kevin
was
McDonald.
on the Altercation Comedy Fest
Yeah,
this year.
the frizzy haired guy,
Yes, yes.
the little squirrely guy.
He's a funny fucker too. He really
Incredibly
is.
funny and so nice and so Canadian. I mean, just
Yeah.
like the first thing he was saying when he showed up, he's like, "I'm sorry, I'm going to bomb tonight. I'm very sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry." And like we're getting ready to leave. He's getting ready to go on stage, getting ready to bring him up. He's like, "I just want to apologize now. This is going to go not well." I'm like, dude.
Yeah.
And of course, he got up there and he murdered. And so, that was a thrill to get to go from
I bet.
again just like a peripheral vouch by one of his cohorts
Hmm.
to suddenly I'm talking to him to suddenly we're hanging out and talking about music on the way to talking about
Now for our, most of our listeners and anybody watching this on YouTube or Rumble or wherever they're watching it today, many of them have never heard of the Altercation Comedy Festival.
Hmm.
So give us a little plug on there.
That's
Tell
something I'm
everybody
proud
what
of.
it is.
Pretty proud of that too. You can go to altercationcomedyfest.com to
Yep.
learn more about that. But that's something coming up on a decade. Next year will be 10 years.
So it's
Uh,
been 9 years now, right?
yeah, this was the nine year.
Mm-hmm.
A little break in there. The COVID thing was rough. That was on a
Yes.
scale down and everything. But yeah, 2015 to 2025. And so it's a comedy festival every fall in Austin over 4 nights. I usually bring in about 80 comics. And I've been increasingly adding stuff like film, like I do avant-garde film stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This year we had a exclusive screening of Cannibal the Musical, which was the South Park dude's first movie, and I had the
Yep.
star come in for that to do an in-person Q&A. This so yeah, it's kind of like the counterculture comedy festival, and it's got a very, very good reputation, and I'm happy with the level it's at. Where most shows, it usually does pretty well.
Yeah.
We're still recovering from COVID stuff in terms of sponsorship because that really leveled the field for sponsors.
Oh, it crushed so many. It crushed
Yeah,
so many things, man.
yeah, and
So many
so
things. But every year, you've had, you know, several solid headliners,
mhm,
you know, and like you say, when you say 70, 80 comedians, that's a
yeah,
lot of people to get on stage,
it
a
sure
lot of
is.
organization.
It's a lot of
And
organization.
for many of them, though, it really is a nice, I don't know, what's the word I want to use, you know,
Well, what's what?
platform for them.
Yeah, it's a great platform because I know the audience is going to be awesome,
Yep.
and I know the other comics. I'm very particular about my selection process, because
Hmm.
the first couple of years it was invite only because I wanted it to make it kind of
Good.
exclusive in that way, and know who I knew enough comics that I'm like I need to make this good off the bat.
Yep.
And but once I hit a level where I was like, well, now I'm out of the comics that I know because there's only so many that I can know personally. I know there's comics I don't know, so I opened it up to applications, and you get a lot of applications now. And out of the applications, I mean, I think we take 50 of like the 80 comics come from strictly like people I don't know or have
Cool.
never seen before. Because it's important to me to keep it fresh and to have new people and to
Hmm.
give new people a new shot. But what's wild is it's become a serious credit because it is kind of hard to get in.
Yeah.
And it is a very specific, it's not a specific style of comedy. It's important to me that like, I like the curation of it. So I like building, it's basically 3 stand-up showcases each night, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Hmm.
And each showcase has like 4 openers and then a headline.
Right.
And the openers each do 12 to 15 minutes. And the headliner does about 40. And so I like going from, oh, this comic is kind of like a one-liner Stephen Wright type comic.
Hmm.
And this comic is more of a physical, does weird stuff with like for example, this year there was a comic that did really funny, brought up a little keyboard, like a small little keyboard thing, Casio keyboard, and did weird looping. He did this whole thing about like his mom yelling at him or whatever. So he did like, get up and go to work or something. And then he was like, I'm trying, I don't work today. And he looped it. So it just turned into this fucking, it felt like his mom was yelling at him on stage. It was
Hmm.
very inventive and funny. And then after that, I had this woman, Valeria Volpe. Holy shit. She's out of New York City, uh, Ukrainian, and does complete deadpan comedy.
Hmm.
So like Eastern European. No, it is, and it was so funny. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to do disservice by doing any of her material, but check her out on Instagram,
Yeah.
Valeria Volpe, Vulpe. Uh, and so having something that animated going to something that deadpan and dry was just like I like that. Like I like having the curation of it being like, oh, but this flows. Like I don't want
Hmm.
a show of all yelly comics. You know what I mean? Like or
Well, I can completely understand what you're saying because it's the same as when you build a musical show.
sure.
When you have a show and you got 4, 6, 8 bands maybe. One of those punk rock shows where it's band after band after band.
Mhm.
If you do all rockabilly bands,
Uh,
at the end it's the same show. We're all hardcore bands or
yep.
all
Yeah.
punk band.
Everybody looks like Rancid. It's so boring.
It's so much better to split
Yeah.
it up, to break it up, and then of course to let the show build. If your headliner or you know the last band on for the night
Mhm.
has the most energy, you have to put them on at the end.
Yeah.
And if you have your acoustic guy or your instrumental people or whatever it is, maybe you put him up front, but
Right.
you have to build the show so the show works.
Right.
And it's the exact same thing in comedy. If you don't, it hurts the show as a whole.
Yeah.
No matter how well one or two comedians may shine, they shine a whole lot better
Yes.
when they're juxtaposed against each other, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I totally agree. And I mean, when I first started it, I wanted it to be like an avant-garde stand-up, very stand-up heavy. I didn't want improv or sketch.
Hmm.
And I still don't have much of that. But as it went on, I'm like, oh, I'm going to have this monster movie mockery where we license a horror movie film and do like mystery science theater stuff because that's something to break it up and it's different. And
Yeah,
it always ends with a music act. And so,
that's what I
we
was thinking.
have,
I always throw a couple of bands in there too.
yeah, it used to be the Beaumonts who were an amazing band that dressed like they're on Hee Haw. Incredible. You've seen the Beaumonts.
I love the Beaumonts,
Incredible. I just
and
had lunch with them a week ago.
it's funny. I just turned my niece onto them because she likes. Well, we had a whole back and forth about how there is real country music
Uh-huh.
as opposed to garbage crap
Sure.
pop country music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I turned her on to several bands, and one of them was the Beaumonts.
Mm-hmm.
And I says they have a whole. Well, they are a comedic
Yes.
band.
Very funny, but also can play their ass off. Like,
Oh no,
yeah.
they're a phenomenal band,
Yeah.
but they happen to be funny at the same
Yes.
time.
Yeah. So something like that. Like I didn't want like a guitar comic or anything necessarily, but like but they ended up they're on a hiatus. So once they were on hiatus, I switched in Heels, which of course we put out via Altercation Records, a bunch of Heels records.
Excellent band.
Which, their drummer Josh McLean is a fantastic comic that toured with me quite a bit. So they're very known amongst the comedy world. And so I always end the thing with a big music blowout. And so, yeah, it's important to keep it diverse, but also kind of on brand in terms of it all feels like Altercation Fest. But what's wild to me now is I hear from comics, and it makes me happy, is that, I mean, it's some years I've made money on it. Some years I've lost a lot of money. That's just how it goes. And the lost,
The nature of the beast, man.
yeah. And I mean, the year I lost money, arguably I had the most headliners, and every show was almost sold out, if not sold out. But it was poor timing. I had booked it, and then a week later, a big other festival thing. There's a big like Grand Prix race thing down here called F1, and they announced that weekend that I had already announced mine for the same weekend, and all the hotels and flights went through the roof because it's kind of a rich person's thing, and so a Motel 6 was $500 a night,
Yeah.
like overnight, everything jumped. I started having fans because a lot of people travel in to go to the comedy festival. And they were saying, I can't come this year. Like, why are the hotels so expensive? It's like $3,000 for me to stay there for 4 nights. I'm like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, shit. And so that was one that was, incredibly successful on the face, but I still lost like $6,000.
Yeah.
And, that's hard where it's so, everyone's like, that was the best. And, you did all the work. And it's just like, wow, I owe a used car.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody compliments. All you can say is you're welcome.
Yeah.
So.
And so, but that aside, and some years I have made money. This year was a bit of a break even and a little bit of coin in my pocket. But like the real currency for me is that comics will say, man, I like. Everyone says getting an Altercation Fest credit is like the badge of cool. Like if you get that, then you and comics will tell me they mentioned that they've done Altercation and it opens doors. Like they'll get a spot ahead of someone because of that. And that makes me happy. And so that's kind of mission accomplished. So we're coming up on 10 years and I'm going to try and really blow it out for next year, but I'm also still recovering from this year because it was only 3 weeks ago or whatever. So I'm still letting myself rest before I start thinking about next year.
Well, it's got to be tough now too. I mean, so many things have changed about Austin in the last 20 years that you've been down there.
Incredibly difficult.
And it has. Yeah, I mean, it was always dubbed the music capital of the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of turning into the comedy capital of the world
right
now too.
No kind of about it. Like but it's also that's made the job way harder because a lot of my friends now, because there is so many high profile places, comedy clubs, and such a fervent scene, people can get paid pretty good to come in here.
Hmm.
The Joe Rogan Club, the Mothership, I know for a fact pays really well. And um, so when my friends, no, I mean, nobody skips Austin throughout the year. Everybody
Yeah.
comes into Austin at least once. So it's the type of thing, though, to come do Altercation Fest, even if their enthusiasm is really there and they want to, it's a lot of money because I can't pay what those other clubs can pay. Uh, and so it's a big ask to be like, hey, Skip, if your Austin show for the year, how about you do my festival, which is
Yes.
going to be a great time, and you're going to love it and all the things, but it's X amount of money instead of 5 times X amount of money. I
Well,
I can't
it's
really
very
ask
hard.
that
It's
of
very
people.
hard to say no to the money.
It's also I don't like asking my friends to do that. I'm like I want my friends to get paid because I know how hard stand up is in terms of much like acting, I guess. Like you're always unemployed until you're not. You
Yes.
know what I mean? You're
Yep.
always waiting for the phone to ring for the next gig, and so that's made it harder to book. I don't really. I always have some favorites that come back and have done festival several times, like Mo Alexander. Um, people of that ilk that I like have, but I don't like to repeat over and over and over again. I mean, Pepitone's done it a bunch, but
Hmm.
I don't want to make it predictable, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
And so it's also like I'm not just going to go back to the well of calling up the same old buddy again, if I can help it. And on top of that, because there's so many clubs and so many shows, Austin is now a culture of, unless it's a major club like Rogan's or Cap City, um, people want comedy for free because comics give it away. There's 5 fucking shows every night that are like, please come, you know? And
Oh,
so
I
when
know.
you don't value something like that, to have someone say like, yeah, it's $30 to come in, but I promise you it's good and you're getting 3 shows. I don't
Yeah.
charge by the show. I charge by the night.
Hmm.
So, if you're spending that $30 ticket on a Saturday night, you're getting the Kids in the Hall guy, but you're also getting an all headliner show and you're getting heels and you're getting, whatever. But I think it's a very fair and valuable pricing setup. But I mean, the reality is, people, that's another thing why I don't do much comedy in Austin. It's like, if I'm going to do it, there is a club, I won't say which one, but a newer club started and they do stuff showcase style, which means there's like 4 or 5 comics and then the headliner does like 25 minutes instead of
Hmm.
a host, a feature, and the headliner doesn't. And they said, we'd love to have you come do it. We know you're busy, but we'd love to have you come. And I was like, well, when is it? He's like, this Friday, this whatever Friday. And I said, I'm home. I said, well, what's the setup? Like, what are the details? And he said, well, we're just starting out. So right now, for headliners for the 20 minutes, we've been giving them $50. But for you, I'm sure we can bump it up. And I was like, dude, no offense, but like, I'm not
Yes.
driving 45 minutes downtown for $50. Like I don't know, to do stand up for 30 minutes. I'm just not.
Yeah.
And maybe that's arrogant or whatever, but it's just, I'm just,
No, but there comes a point in time when this is now you are now a professional.
yes. Yeah.
Again, you're a journeyman. You have your union card, so to speak.
Right.
You know, and you must be paid the prevailing wage. To make it worthwhile. This is what you do for a living.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't insulted by it. I mean, it is what it
Well,
is.
you
And
know how it works. Just how many times you've put shows together yourself where you simply can't pay the band or pay the comedian
right.
what you'd like to, and you can have the show or don't take the show. No
Yeah.
hard feelings.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fine. But I also know that like so many comics would gnaw their own hand off to get paid at all, in a sense
Sure.
that I'm just like, I know they're going to have no problem filling that spot. And it's nice to
Well,
be
how many
asked,
free
but
shows did you do in the past?
what's that?
How many free shows have you done in the past?
Um, Honestly,
Just to
from the
have the
get go,
show.
not a lot. I've done shows, I've done opening support acts where I don't worry about what the money is. The first time I worked with Doug Stanhope, I was so thrilled to do that. I didn't ask about what pay scale there was. I just went and did it. And at the end of the night, he handed me money. And I was like, oh, bonus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So if there's other intangible aspects of me saying yes to something like that. I mean, if that same showcase person asked me to headline for $50 and 2 of my visiting friends from LA happen to be on the show also, I'd say, yeah, totally. You know what I mean? But if it's just me that's just my Friday night. I don't know. I don't know. That's probably age too. Creeping up on 50 as I am, like
Absolutely.
you just don't want to. So yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of work, but I'm excited for people to finally be able to read this thing. I mean, I've been keeping it under wraps for so long. I made myself wait until the deal was signed before I even announced what the project was.
Yes.
So that was hard. So,
No, no doubt. Well, yeah, again, you wanted to keep it secret,
yeah,
so it wouldn't get brought
yeah.
out.
Now that it's fully like being published and announced, I'm more comfortable with if someone tries to steal the idea now. At least I already announced it first. People be like, hey, you're ripping him off.
Now, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you didn't have a date yet, though. Do we have a date yet? I know
So
it's spring,
yeah, it's spring. It's
so it's going to be in the next few weeks sometimes, but we don't know exactly when.
yeah. As a former publisher myself, I know that the lead time on these things, and I'm sure you're aware too, writing books,
Hmm.
if you want it out at X, with the record label, whatever, you really need to have this stuff there and in. And so, for better for worse, when we finalized the deal uh, with Jawbone, they said, well, in theory, our spring is already set with our salespeople. Like
Hmm.
it's how the distro world works. It's like 5-6 months out. I'm like, I totally get that. I said, is there any way you could push it anyway? And he said, it'll ruffle a few sales suits, but I don't mind doing that. I was like, this is why we're getting along. Like, that's the right
Yeah.
answer. Because I knew I was less concerned about them. Well, the fact that the book was done. It wasn't like I had pitched a concept and then had to write it and then we'd figure out when. So the book is, I'm like, I can get you stuff in a week. I can get you finalized everything. The cover's done. I paid for the cover. Like everything's set. Except to write this author's note. Um, and so they said, well, as long as you can get us stuff by mid-January, like final everything, and our paperwork's signed in December, we should be able to, again, because they're London based, go to press on it in like late April or so, and then have books. They send books to their US distributor and by default to me by ship from the UK.
Hmm.
And so, because it's heavy freight. And so they said, I should have copies by late May and it should be in stores worldwide no later than June.
Outstanding.
So it was either that or wait to the next segment, which wasn't until like October. And I didn't want to wait.
Yes.
That didn't make
Yeah.
sense. It's ready to go.
That's what people don't. There are seasons for books for people who don't realize,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually, what do you call it? Spring, summer, which is spring is actually winter,
Mm-hmm.
summer is actually spring,
Yep.
and then nothing happens again all the way until there's three of them. The next one is the pre-holiday, you know,
Right.
fall/holiday season.
Right.
You know.
And the other thing that was, beneficial is that I can buy author copies from them
Hmm.
at a reasonable rate. And so I can do I have my book up right now. If you go to doingtimecomedy.com, you can pre-order a signed copy of the book. And I can do pre-sales because I know I'm going to be buying these copies and they're on their way.
You beat me to my next question, and that is exactly what's up with the pre-sales. So
Yeah.
people can please tell us again. They can pre-buy them or
Yeah.
pre-sale them
Yeah.
at
So,
your website.
right. So it'll be in stores late May, early June, everywhere worldwide. But
Yeah.
but if you want to buy an author copy, if you want to buy a copy from me signed and mailed to you as soon as I get it, which hopefully would be before that, you just go to doingtimecomedy.com and there's a purchase the book right off there. A little bit more about who specifically is in it and a little bit about
We'll add that in the notes, but it's not ready for Amazon, Barnes and Noble. People
all
haven't
those
yet.
places. It won't be there until late May, probably June realistically by the time it gets to one place and goes to another.
Yeah.
So buying it through me is the first place you'll get it for sure. Like it's the quickest way to get it.
Very good.
It's also the best for me as opposed to Amazon. So that's helpful too. Uh, but yeah, I'm real excited for it to be out, man. I'm pretty proud of it, and it's a crazy amount of work. So I'm eager to see what people think about it.
Yeah.
Because I've let a few people, close friends, read kind of bare bones aspects of it because I was curious if the working class kind of my level comics that they may not know by name, if those stories were as engaging as a Maria Bamford or a Bobcat Goldthwait. So far, the response has been yeah. So that's pretty cool. You know,
Well, this might
that
be again a great introduction to many of these
yes,
comedians also.
that's my
You
hope
know,
also that it'll
because
be
people
somebody that.
will do that. You know how people are. You know, they'll buy for the name that they know.
Oh sure, oh absolutely,
You know,
yep.
but if they stumble across something better along the way,
Hmm.
even better.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's my
and that's
hope
great.
too, because these are all lifers. These are all people that do it for real and put out. They have albums under their belt. They're signed to high profile comedy labels and stuff. People like Jay Chenoine, who he's in
Yes,
there.
I like
Very
Jay.
funny people that not
Jay's
everyone
a
may
good guy.
know, and does people deserve to know them. So yeah, I'm real
Well,
eager.
we got you there. Let's plug some of your other stuff now too. You
Sure.
have a couple of albums.
Yeah.
You have other stuff that people can get.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, you would know more of them better than I would. So, what else you
Yeah,
got?
my most recent special came out on 800 Pound Gorilla Records, which is a comedy label out of Nashville. They're unfortunately in a bit of a legal dispute with streaming, and so it's hard to hear my record on streaming outlets, which is very frustrating.
I'm sure it
Um,
is.
yeah, but you can buy my vinyl. I put out 180-gram swamp green vinyl of that record, which I recorded in Gainesville, Florida. You go to jtcomedy.com. There's a store link off there. I think there's copies in there. And I have them at shows all the time. And so that's my most recent comedy special. And I have a bunch of other back records on Stand Up Records, which is standuprecords.com. I put out 3 albums with them. So, but most of it is, one was filmed. Misanthrope was a DVD, which I don't know if you find a DVD player these years. I know there's like a Stand Up Records Roku channel and stuff, but um, as far as streaming, Netflix special type things, people, I need to probably do more of that. Like YouTube has really blown up as far as people debuting specials on YouTube
Yeah.
now. So I don't know. I don't want to think about a comedy special right now because I've been so, um, a new hour is a lot of work to get honed. And I've got a new 25 minutes of brand new stuff right now, which isn't bad considering how much time the book has been on. But right now I'm just focusing on the book. Like 2025 is going to be all about getting this book out. I
Oh
really
well,
want to.
that's exactly what it should be
That
about.
that's my whole focus of it, and then I'll worry about a new special after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got a few records out there. A lot of them are on Amazon, I think.
Hmm.
But jtcomedy.com has all that stuff, and I'm hitting the road. I got be in Denver. I don't know when this will air, but in January I'll be in Denver with Brian Posehn, and I've got some of those. There's these things called Don't Tell Comedy, which I encourage people to check out too. Just don'ttellcomedy.com, I think. But they're secret shows with secret headliners, and I've been doing a bunch of those, so I might pop up, and you might not know it's me until I'm there. It's like a
Interesting.
speakeasy type vibe. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Basically, people buy tickets, and then they find out where the venue is and who's performing the day of,
Hmm.
and it's like you can bring it's BYOB usually, and those are pretty fun. But yeah, I'll be doing Santa
You
Fe
got a
and
hardcore comedy fan though, huh?
what's that?
You gotta love comedy to go to a show you don't know who you're gonna see.
Yeah, you do, but most of them sell out. It's a
Yeah.
big hit with the college age kids. It's a great like date night thing. So,
Hmm.
uh, but also I thought that too because I'm naturally dubious of that type of stuff. But they really vet the comics. Like they have really good comics on all the shows, so
To
it's
make sure it's a good show.
make
Yeah.
sure it's a good show because otherwise they won't come back.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I got Oklahoma City and Santa Fe in February with Brian Posehn. Northern California with Eddie Pepitone in February. Lydia Lunch and I are talking, trying to figure out. She's always in Europe, so we're trying to figure out another quick run. But yeah, no signs of slowing down. So, and then what's up with your new book? You're cranking them out more than I can keep track.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the fifth one came out this year.
Mhm.
The sixth one is finished. It's in the editing stage now, which,
Yeah,
as you know, takes quite a while, and
yeah.
then it's got to come back for rewrites and then go back again. Um, but yeah, we should have one, possibly two out in 2025,
Shoot, you're a maniac. That's crazy. That's
which will,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, the
Well,
editing
once
process.
I kind of, what do I want to say? Got my sea legs.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
totally.
we've been cranking
Yeah,
them out pretty well.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
been
Yeah.
shocking. They're popular. Who knew?
They are. I know. That's
Yeah.
that's awesome. Yeah, I Josh McClain is hooked on them from Heels.
Yes.
He's every one. He's like, new one's out. He messes me. Yeah, I mean, the editing process, is so. I mean, I read this book from front to back, I think 4 times in full sweeps of editing because it's so important.
Yeah.
And I know the minute I get the book back and I crack it open, I'm going to find something immediately that's going to make me set myself on fire.
Every time.
It's always the way.
Yeah.
But thanks so much, man, for the chat. It's good to see your face again.
It's really nice catching up with you, JT. Good seeing you again. Best of luck with this book, brother.
Thanks, buddy.
I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Yeah, I can't wait to give you a copy.
And you're not going to give me nothing. I'm going to buy one.
Nah, we'll fight about that. But I mean, one of the cool things too in that, even with it not coming out till maybe May or June, is that because people have been asking, are you going to do a book tour? Blah, blah, blah. I said, well, I don't have it for another bunch of weeks, but I have dates in January, I have dates in February, and every comedy audience is a crowd that I know likes comedy. So I'm going to be at the door after every show handing out a flyer saying, hey, here's this you don't know about.
Exactly.
So it's kind of great to have my job be a default street team at the same time with an audience that's into the thing I'm going to be trying to get them to order. So we'll see. I'm feeling optimistic about it right now. So it's a pretty exciting time for it. And a good way to wrap up a year.
I'm really excited for this one. I've read the first 2. And of course, I know all your albums. I know all your work. I don't know how many times I've seen you stand up live.
Sure.
More times than I can count, probably.
Yep.
And I'm very excited for this book to come out.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think it's the best thing I've done, which is it's hard for me to self-praise, but it's easy for me to be like, all right, I did the job. If that makes sense. I don't like hyping myself, but I feel like, all right, I did a good job on this. So I'm excited for people to read it, and hopefully they agree. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe they think it needs to be set into chapters.
Yeah. All right, my brother.
All right, man. Yeah, it's good to talk to you, pal. So yeah, doingtimecomedy.com is the spot. And I hope to see you soon. We can get a beer or something for real.
Absolutely.
Try and get to the East Coast.
I'd love that.
So, all right, T. Thanks so much, man.
All the best, brother. Thank you so much.
Take it easy.
All right. That's it. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with JT Habersaat, because I did. And do yourselves a favor come spring. If you're a fan of comedians and the comic life and you want to know all the dirty inside stories, all right, pick up a copy of his newest book out this spring, Doing Time by JT Habersaat. You'll be happy you did. Also, if you're anywhere in the Austin, Texas area in the fall of 2025, get yourself some tickets for the Altercation Comedy Festival. It's a great, great time. I promise you that. All right. There's going to be over 70, as many as 80 comedians lined up waiting to make you laugh. Other than that, please do the right thing. Do the right thing. Hit the like, hit the subscribe button for me, your friend, Travis Myers. And that's it. Until next time, my friends, all the best. Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.